There's a man that got famous in America who was running for a campaign, and his slogan was, "The rent is too damn high." And it's coming to a point in South Africa where the price of electricity is too damn high. Let's talk about electricity today. Johannesburg electricity consumers are now paying more for electricity as of the 1st of July 2024. In fact, there's a 200 Rand charge that has been added to their electricity bill across the board. There's a broader issue of the increase of the price of electricity in South Africa due to increasing tariffs. In today's episode of The Dissection, we're going to look at why this has been happening. From 1998 up until 2008, electricity tariff increases were actually under inflation. This was due to government policy to keep tariffs as low as possible and due to adequate supply of electricity. Between 1988 and 2007, electricity tariffs increased by 223%, while inflation over this period was 335%. And as you can see this from the graphic, from 2008 onwards, there was a clear inflection point, a sharp inflection point for electricity tariffs in South Africa. If you look at that, the period from 2007 to 2022, electricity tariffs increased by 653%, while inflation over this period was 129%. Thus, the increase in electricity was fourfold or quadruple the amount of money quadruple in real money terms in 14 years. Think about that. Look at it a different way. If we put it another way, in the year 2000, the price of electricity per kilowatt hour was 37 cents. In 2005, it was 40 cents. In 2010, it was 67 cents. In 2015, it was 94 cents. But look at 2020, 110 cents. 2024, 320 cents. If you look at these graphics, you can see that electricity prices in South Africa have exponentially increased. So let's try to get a basis and look at some exhibits in terms of why this electricity price increase has happened in the way that it has. So, number one, let's just understand the electricity price increase in Gauteng and how it's going to work.
The reason for this charge is that, remember, electricity as a service has got two components. There is the consumption, it's the kilowatt hours that you use. But then there is the infrastructure that is needed to provide you with those kilowatt, to bring the kilowatt hours to you as and when you need it. When you switch off the light, you don't need the electricity, you're not using kilowatt hours. But the ability for you to switch that light on and off, for the electricity to be available on demand, that's where the network comes into play. So the prepaid tariff was structured in a way that that customer was not contributing sufficiently to the cost of that we are incurring to making sure that electricity is available as and when you demand it. Now, how are we going to implement this? It then means that if a customer works in a store today with a 200 Rand in his hand to buy electricity, what will happen is that you put the VAT part of it up on the side, but otherwise you take the 200 Rand, you split it into two. The 100 Rand will be used for the basic charges, and for the other 100 Rand that you would then be getting kilowatt hours, which would be approximately 16 or 17, 18, around there that you will get after that. Now that should last you maybe 2, 3 or 4 days. If you then come back with another 100 Rand, or again, then it will be split. 100 for basic charges and 100 for the consumption until the 200 Rand is fully covered for the month. But if you should work in the shop with 800 Rand to buy electricity, what it will happen is that you will get kilowatt hours for the 600 Rand, and the 200 Rand would then go towards the basic charges that you, as a prepaid customer in the previous financial year, did not incur or you were not paying.
Did you get that? Did you see what the man... And it's obvious, they were trying to message this as something that is for high income earners and something that is for middle income earners only. But the concept of middle income in South Africa is one that is misleading, because if high income earners make over 100,000 rands a month, it doesn't mean that the middle income earners are making 50,000. In fact, most people are earning under 10,000 rands. So 3,000 rands a month for electricity becomes a big, big blow to someone's monthly income. And there's already a cost of living crisis in South Africa, that because food has gone up, fuel went up, people are struggling to make ends meet. Households have high levels of debt. They are paying a lot as well for medical aid, car insurance. People are not making ends meet. So to add cost of electricity, or to keep increasing the cost of electricity, that's something that's going to affect a whole lot of households. And even though they were saying that, oh no, it's just for high income earners, or even though they're saying prepaid customers are not paying their fair share, that's not true. Oftentimes, prepaid customers pay more than the people who are not on the prepaid system. But let's go back in time. I want to take you back to a clip from 2010 for you to understand when this idea started gaining traction that South African electricity is too cheap, right? There are people who are pushing that South African electricity is too cheap and the price must go up. I don't want to say it on their behalf. I want you to listen and hear what they said.
Electricity prices are a very growing concern in South Africa. Eskom has now revised its tariff increases to 35% for the next 3 years, and that's from 45% initially, but still a very big blow for industries out there. Do you think that it's viable to have electricity prices at those levels going forward? And what is African Rainbow Minerals going to be doing to try and mitigate that extra cost every year?
There are various initiatives that we've undertaken over the last few months, and I've been exposed as well to various initiatives that the mining industry as a whole is implementing, that are aimed at making sure that the increase in the costs of electricity do not have a fundamental impact on profitability, or even on the continued sustainability of their businesses. We have for many years had a cost of electricity that was recognized at by global terms to have been very competitive, and without a doubt, the new increases have compelled all of us to go back and to review. But over the years, there's been some discussions about introducing competitors to Eskom, and in many parts of the world, you do have these independent power producers. I don't know at this stage as to how competitive. And in fact, the information I received in the past was that because Eskom was so cheap, it was unattractive for independent power producers to enter into the market. But we have to look at the cost of electricity and mitigate those expenses as best we can, and we will do that.
Copenhagen is currently underway, and South Africa has pledged to cut back on its carbon emissions by 42% by 2025. Do you think that South Africa is capable of cutting back on emissions so extensively, considering that we're so reliant on the mining industry? And the mining industry, of course, is one of those industries and sectors of the economy that contributes significantly to South Africa's growing carbon footprint.
I think as an industry and as a country, we have a huge obligation to significantly reduce our CO2 emissions, or our contribution to global warming. And I am aware that there are various initiatives, various projects that are underway, and I think in some cases various studies. There's a huge commitment, and as an industry and as a company, we are committed to make our contribution. It's very important long term. We do need a planet that provides a safe environment for, I don't know, many hundreds and thousands of years to come.
So let's unpack what he said. He said electricity was too cheap, and it was unattractive for people who wanted to go into the independent power producer space. And therefore, there was a need to look at how to increase the price of electricity. What just happened, right? If you look at the data that I gave you earlier, that's just exactly what happened. Then that's the business reason that is being given so that this space can become attractive. We know, if we fast forward, that African Rainbow Minerals became also African Rainbow Minerals and Energy, and that Mr. Patrice Motsepe became one of the largest benefactors of this IPP rollout, which he was speaking about in 2010. In fact, in one of the bid windows, we know that Ikamva Consortium, which is made up of 4 companies, including African Rainbow Minerals and Energy, the other one is Globleck, the other one is Mainstream Renewable Energies, the other one is H1 Holdings. They became winners. In one instance, they won 12 out of 25 of the bids in a bid window. So they basically won almost 50%, right? And that gives you an indication of the scale at which they have become a dominant player. In fact, they are the majority player in that space, the IPP space. So it was too cheap. It had to become more expensive. Then we were given a climate reason. Keep attention to that climate reason, right? We're told, listen, global warming is a factor, carbon emissions, coal is dirty. We need to do something sustainable and clean. The answer is nuclear. Nuclear power could have solved the energy provision problems and also dealt with the clean energy problem. However, the choice that was taken of wind and solar was specifically to allow these IPP companies to come in and then to be able to take over the space. And I'm going to show you in the next clip what has happened, because just yesterday, an energy economics expert, was asked about whether or not privatization is happening on SABC1, and this is what they had to say.
Privatize or not to privatize? That's the question.
You made a very important point, and that's the point about privatization, which is actually happening in South Africa, because not because it's part of policy or because it's part of the ideology, but it's simply because there's no other option. The private sector is just taking over the generation of electricity in South Africa. I think we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more private sector participation, not only at Eskom, but we're going to see more private sector participation in many of the other state-owned enterprises, like, for example, Transnet as well. Because the state-owned enterprises have been mismanaged for many, many years, and that we are in the process of getting more private sector participation. And that creates a lot of opportunities for the private sector as well.
So obviously that's where we see Eskom.
Did you hear that? The private sector is taking over the generation of electricity at Eskom. And the private sector is generating electricity from solar and wind. And if you then backtrack and look at what was said by Patrice Motsepe in 2010, it's clear that African Rainbow Minerals and Energy is one of the benefactors of the privatization of generation of electricity in Eskom. And the argument that is given that the government is incompetent or incapable to generate electricity is one that's a little bit misleading. Brian Dames, the CEO of African Rainbow Minerals and Energy, used to work at Eskom. He used to be in charge of generation. And in fact, Eskom was capable to generate electricity while he was the leader and CEO of Eskom. I think he was the CEO from 2010 to 2014. Then he left. Where did he go after he left? He went to African Rainbow Minerals and Energy to become the CEO of Africa. What are we doing here? What, guys, can you see? Is it not clear? Analytically looking at the evidence, is it not clear that there was a push for IPPs, and that as a result of that push and a continuous increase in pricing through tariffs at Eskom and a change in legislation to allow for IPPs to come in? What is that change in legislation? Legislation was created. The REIPP, the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program, they made it legal. Sometimes when big businesses want to do something, when they want to come into a space and take that space, they ask politicians to change the laws so that they can have access to those spaces. Do you see this? Is it clear? Wayibona lento. You must understand. Ons baizani. That's what one of those. Now, I want to take it global. BlackRock is one of the largest in fact, it's the largest asset management company in the world. And this year, it bought another asset management company. And when they were asked and they had a conversation about this is what they spoke about. Themes come up. Themes about the climate. Themes about debt. Deficits. Have you been hearing about deficits? And how governments need to pay off their deficits, etc., and how we need to manage debt, etc. That's important. Very important. Listen to what they say about infrastructure, and particularly energy infrastructure. Right? Listen. This is their own words. It's almost witness testimony if you think about it.
You need GIP to get done what you want to get done.
No, we believe infrastructure is only at the beginning of a real major asset class. There are some structural demands that are going to increase the issuance of more and more infrastructure. I've said for all along, and Bloomberg has been talking about that for a number of years, that deficits matter. It's going to be harder and harder for countries to continue to deficit finance. And at the same time, there's a giant need to rebuild and build out infrastructure, whether it is the digital infrastructure as we are all trying to become more engaged with AI and other forms. We have a decarbonization process. More and more countries are more interested than ever before in energy independence. And one of the ways in countries that do not have available hydrocarbons, they're going to be doing it through wind and solar, maybe other forms of decarbonization. And then from the demand side, what can be better for retirement investors than long duration assets with a high coupon that is inflation protected? So you think about, our clients, 65% of our clients are retirement assets. And when you think about BlackRock and the roles we play with many governments, our continuous ownership in stock and bonds of every major corporation in the world, more and more companies are coming to us. And over the last few years, we did build up a very large and really successful infrastructure team. So I think we have the business strategy down. I'm confident we are in the early part of this infrastructure revolution. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to have the scale. We wanted to have the expertise, the operational expertise of GIP, marrying that expertise with BlackRock's global relationships with companies and governments, marrying our existing expertise in decarbonization and infrastructure. It's a perfect partnership.
This is going to be the golden age of infrastructure investing, both in terms of the need for capital as well as investors who want that capital, okay? And so the question we asked ourselves was, how can we accelerate the pace at which we're getting things done? Investing in new assets as well as getting pension funds, wealth funds, asset managers to give us additional capital. And so if you look at the marriage between ourselves and BlackRock, Rob Kavito said it was 1 + 1 = 4. I'm not sure whether it was 4 or 5 or 3, but he's certainly right that 1 + 1 is more than 2. As Larry said, perfect mirror images of each other. They have a great infrastructure business, but very complementary with ours. We do large cap transactions. They do mid cap transactions. They have a terrific infrastructure debt business. It's primarily investment grade. Ours is primarily below investment grade. They have an infrastructure solutions business, which we don't have. So you put these two businesses together. We can go to governments, we can go to companies, large, small, medium-sized, and offer them an integrated solution. So that was very attractive.
Briefly here at the end, is the opportunity because of climate? But for the concerns with climate, would the same opportunity exist for infrastructure?
That's only one part of the growth of infrastructure. Decarbonization is obviously a major component of it, but we should not lose light of the need to be constantly upgrading and growing.
Let's start with that last question. Is this possible because of climate? He tried to move a little bit to try to deflect some of the focus of that question. But the answer is yes, right? The decarbonization conversation has led to pressure being put on governments to talk and start pursuing wind and solar for the benefits of private equity companies, right? So even though the solution that is available to many countries is actually nuclear, right? They want to push through wind and solar because they are the market leaders in that space, even though wind and solar aren't necessarily the best ways to generate enough energy for countries which have got high manufacturing needs, high mining needs, etc. But they're pushing for that. So it actually is as a result of this just energy transition that they are able to put pressure on companies. Did you also notice that he said that the reason why they're going to be able to exploit this opportunity is that national governments are in debt and deficits are going to matter more and more. And there's going to be pressure on governments to reduce their deficits so that they cannot actually invest in infrastructure that then creates space for these companies, these private equity companies, to then come in and buy those assets and develop those assets. Do you see how it works? So the acquisition of Global Infrastructure Solutions by BlackRock is something that was significant in 2024. And in addition, did you notice that he says we have relationships with governments? We can pressure these governments through institutions such as the World Economic Forum, where Larry Fink sits. He's one of the biggest names in the World Economic Forum. So does Patrice Motsepe actually sit in the World Economic Forum. Then they also say we own a lot of the companies, so we can also pressure these companies. They don't own them outright, but they have shareholder shares in those companies. So we can create pressure at a company level, at a government level. And guys, do you see how this is being enforced? The other thing that's important to note is that when it comes to global carbon emissions, South Africa is not a leading country in global carbon emissions. And in fact, there's a graphic that came out recently. I'm going to put it on here so that you can see that when it comes to emissions, South Africa barely contributes. So why are African countries, South Africa, being forced to do this? By the way, BlackRock owns shares in many South African companies, and people who are billionaires in this country also have their companies which are partly owned by BlackRock. So this conversation at a global level is an important conversation that you need to be aware of. This is partly what has been contributing to the increased prices of electricity. So there's a deeper question that I want us to explore here. And the question is, should public goods be privately owned? Should infrastructure be privately owned? Remember, he said to people that, listen, this is a good asset class for us because it's basically buffered from inflation, right? We're going to be able to make a lot of long-term money for our shareholders, and that's why we want to be buying infrastructure around the world. Now, you have to be asking yourself, is it healthy for shareholders, right? Global elites who have shares in these private equity companies to be owning global infrastructure of governments, of countries? Is that something that's healthy? Is that something that we want? Think about that. But let me give you some key concepts to frame, because I know that not all of us have studied economics at any level. I did at a university, so we can have a conversation. So I want to define, first and foremost, a public good. A public good is a good that is provided to the public by a government for a variety of reasons. And it has two key features, right? Number one, non-excludability, which means it's not possible to exclude individuals from using the good. And two, non-rivalry, which means that the use of a good by one person does not reduce its availability to others. Now, those are classic public goods, but there are other goods that are provided by the state, because if the state does not provide for them, they can be market failures, they can be inefficiencies, and when the state does provide for them, they are public goods. That there's a net positive to the society, right? Some examples of public goods are national defense, parks, policing, streetlights, vaccinations, public goods which are provided by the state, which don't typically fit the definition or the two features of non-excludability and non-rivalry, are things such as basic education, electricity, and water. And these are better understood through the concept of a merit good. Merit goods are goods that society values and believes should be available to all, regardless of an individual's ability to pay. The government often intervenes to ensure that merit goods are provided because, number one, they generate something known as positive externalities, such as higher productivity, lower crime rates, better public health, and individuals individually may undervalue the benefits of those particular goods and thus underconsume it without intervention or provision. Which is to say, for instance, if there was no basic education provided for free, some families would not educate their children. They would say, no, education is expensive. You don't need education. And they wouldn't even take them to primary school, right? So that's a possibility. So to avoid that and to avoid the then consequences that come from maybe 20, 30% of a population not even bothering to go to school, you make public education free. And we know this from history because prior to the provision of public education in African countries, you had, children being sent to the farms to work on the land. Those what you call them, subsistence farms, where the family farms to feed themselves. You had a lot of situations like that. You had a lot of girls being sent into childhood marriages, that kind of a thing, or told that they shouldn't go to school because there was a cost factor there as well, and because there wasn't legislation. So to correct for that, basic education is provided for free in many African states, and then laws are put in place to prevent kids being sent to the fields instead of being sent to school or being put into child marriages or anything of that nature, or girls necessarily being overlooked for education, right? So in South Africa, you are mandated to send a kid to school up until the age of 15, right? You can't have kids missing school. You can't have kids being sent to the fields, or you can't have girls, for instance, being discriminated against because of patriarchy and misogyny. All of these things are because there's a recognition that a merit good is necessary, right? Positive externalities and social benefits, right? Education, for example, benefits the society because it generates significant positive externalities. You have economic growth. An educated workforce is more productive and can adapt better to technological and social changes, creating and fostering economic growth. You also have social cohesion. Education promotes social cohesion and reduces inequality by providing individuals with the skills needed to participate fully in society. Health and well-being. Educated individuals tend to have better health outcomes and contribute to healthier communities. This is why it is provided as a merit good, right? This is why. Now, we've spoken about public goods. There's another thing that I want to speak about just before I comment on the idea of having private companies owning infrastructure, owning public goods as a means to provide efficiencies and as a means to improve provision. A natural monopoly, you need to know what a natural monopoly is. A natural monopoly occurs in an industry where a single firm can produce the entire output for the market at lower cost than multiple firms. This situation arises due to the following issues. It arises due to economies of scale, meaning that the firm can increase its production, the average cost per unit decreases, and there are some characteristics of natural monopolies, right? And the characteristics will begin to explain to you where natural monopolies occur. Natural monopolies occur where there are high fixed costs, where there are economies of scale, where there are barriers to entry, and there is a likelihood of price setting, right? Natural monopolies typically involve industries with very high fixed costs and very low variable costs. The initial investment required for infrastructure or the technology is substantial, but the cost of producing additional units is relatively low. What this means is that there are very few actors who can run natural monopolies. They can either be billionaires, oligarchs, or governments, right? Economies of scale. The firm's average costs continue to decline as it produces more, making it more efficient for a single firm to supply the entire market, right? Number 3, barriers to entry. The high initial costs create a significant barrier to entry for potential competitors. It is not economically feasible for new firms to enter that market and to compete with the established firms. What are they saying? They're saying you and I cannot just wake up in the morning and start a power company. It's for billionaires. It's for oligarchs. Particularly in South Africa, we must not forget that the oligarchs who exist now mainly benefited from the apartheid economy and the exclusivity that was created by certain networks such as the Broederbond, which created laws to prevent competition and allowed certain companies to become dominant players. These are not companies that just won capitalism. They are the products of deliberate economic management by the apartheid regime. We must not miss that. Naspers, for example, is a dominant company in the media space. They were created as a propaganda arm for the National Party. They were pushing right-wing Afrikaner nationalism for decades, creating the existence of the apartheid regime by changing sentiment in particular parts of South Africa. So fast forward, they used to contribute as well to the National Party. Fast forward, they become this dominant player that owns DSTV, that then owns Takealot and all of these other entities. But the nexus of their competitive advantage was not because they won in a free and fair competition, it's because it was an apartheid company. Full stop. That's it. And so we have to think about that. Now, price setting. Due to the lack of competition, natural monopolies can set prices. This is where you have issues. They don't have competition. They are monopolies, at best oligopolies. This is why only a few companies can then really be dominating the IPP space. The Ikamva consortium is an example. 12 out of 25 of the tenders won went to one consortium. Right? What happens when you have that? The ideas of a market. Let me not jump ahead. Let me give you some examples of natural monopolies. I'm jumping ahead. I'm going to come back to the point I was making. Examples of natural monopolies. These include utilities, electricity, water, gas. Utility companies often operate as natural monopolies because the infrastructure required to supply electricity, water, or gas is expensive and costly. It is more efficient for a single company to build and maintain the infrastructure than for multiple companies to duplicate it. Railroads. The construction and maintenance of railroad tracks involve significant investment. A single railroad company can manage the network more efficiently than multiple companies, which would need to build and maintain parallel tracks. Public transportation system. In many cities, public transportation systems like subways and buses are natural monopolies. The cost of building and maintaining the infrastructure for these systems is high and is more efficient for one company to manage it. Telecommunications. The infrastructure required for telecommunications, such as telephone lines or internet cables, can be so competitive that it becomes more efficient for a single company to provide the service, especially in less densely populated areas. Vuma. Do you not see what I see? Right? Do you see it? There's one company basically running fiber internet in South Africa, right? Natural monopolies can potentially exploit their market power. That's what happens when you have an oligopoly or a monopoly. You have market power, and they exploit that market power because they can charge excessively high prices, and provide subpar service. Natural monopolies arise in industries where fixed costs are high and significant economies of scale make it more efficient for a single firm to supply the single market. The potential for market abuse is very high. Then the question is, when the risk of abuse of power exists, should the company be owned by the public and run by governments who account to voters through elections and through representative structures of accountability, such as parliamentary committees, debates, questions to the minister, you name it? Or should they be run by private companies which account to shareholders and have different incentives than publicly elected officials? That's a question that I'm putting to you. That's a question that I want you to think about as you think about why the price of electricity has gone up. Think about everything that you've seen. Think about everything that you've heard. And ask yourself, this idea that if we privatize, there'll be more competition, is it real when we are dealing with a natural monopoly? The idea that things will be better, is it real when profit-based companies will add costs? Because Private companies are existing to make profits. They're not there to be your friend. They're there to make the money. That's what they're there for. And is it true that state-owned enterprises will inherently never work? Is that true? The Western Cape, people say to me, the Western Cape is well governed. The Western Cape is run by a political party, is it not? There's nothing intrinsic to government ownership that necessitates incompetence. When democracy becomes competitive, people work. They do their work. So if the Western Cape is well run, that's proof that politicians can do a good job if the right ones are selected. That's proof. So the idea that was said by Dowie Root at the beginning that, state-owned enterprises just cannot work. We just need the private sector. Is that really true? Is that really true? Let me give you a case study. I give this case study oftentimes, and you must look it up yourself. Thames Water is a privately run company that provides the people of London with water, named after the River Thames. They got privatized in the early 90s. And the idea was, no, government cannot deliver water. What we need to give this to the private sector so that the private sector can deliver clean, better, pristine water. Fast forward to 2024. The water leakages have been at an all-time high. Pipes, all of that stuff. Also, the water quality has been at an all-time low because there's sewage in Thames water. They're not purifying the water enough. So they are drinking sewage water in London because they privatized that space. Why did this infrastructure not improve? Because private companies don't necessarily fix, they don't do maintenance often. Why? Because maintenance is going to chow our profits, right? So we exist as private companies to maximize shareholder value, maximum profits. So maintenance, long-term maintenance, they're not necessarily going to do that. They're going to pay CEOs and executives high salaries. They're going to give shareholders big dividend payouts, all of that. But what's not going to happen is the benefication of the system. So what ended up happening after that privatization is that now they're having to bail out Thames Water and they are considering nationalizing it because of the problems that exist, the financial problems, the water quality problems, the leakages, all of that. That's a cautionary tale for South Africa. What happened with Thames Water? It was privatized and the outcome was dirty water, more leakage, higher prices. And the people who benefited were the billionaires. So let's go back. Electricity is now more expensive in South Africa than ever before because Eskom tariffs went through the roof. Now prices have been added to the price of electricity, as you saw at NERSA. Now think about it. Not at NERSA, at City Power. Now think about it. Think about it. Is the next administration's agenda to privatize public goods in the best interests of ordinary civilians? Let's have a conversation. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. 81% of the people watching haven't subscribed yet. I would really appreciate your subscription. I really value your subscription, but the subscription also helps YouTube find that people love this content and helps other people find the content and the channel as well. So thank you so much for watching. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section. Till the next one.